So in a video posted earlier this week, I touched on something called patterning, and I explained it very briefly and said that I would go into it in more detail in another video. So today I want to start addressing that more fully and explain what exactly patterning is. So patterning, also known as macrostructural patterning, also known as dysfunctional formation, whatever you want to call it, it's based on the rationale that our ego follows the same steps every single time we go for something in our lives, regardless of what part of our lives it's in. Every single time we go for something and we don't get it. And before I go into further what the pattern is and the methodology in which we use to identify it, I want to take a step back and cover at a more basic level the ego and how it works, because it's a critical part of understanding the pattern. So if you acknowledge that we are spiritual beings having human experiences here, then you will concede that as spiritual beings, we are entirely connected. There is no difference between you and I. We're the same. We're connected to everything through all time and space. We're everything and nothing at the same time. Just go with me on this. And then when we decide to have a human experience, that means we have to then have a unique experience. We have to have a feeling of separation, a feeling of a difference between you and me and him and her, because that's what it means to be human. And so in doing that, we form something called a wound. And some of you may have heard this. It's kind of a buzzword in the self-development world. Again, for those of you not so keen on this stuff, I totally get it. Just hang with me, because we will get to where we're going with this and how it applies to business. So we form this wound in order to give ourselves this feeling of separation, and the separation of unique human me, not you, a difference between you and I. And that's how we start to form our personality. It's what makes me Katie, and you, and everyone else who they are, instead of just, spiritual being connected to everything. And in this wound, we develop certain beliefs, certain limiting beliefs about ourselves. We develop this belief that we are somehow incomplete. There is something, quote, wrong with us, and whatever that may be. I'm not enough. I don't belong. I'm not worthy. I'm not allowed to be capable. Many of these things, some of these things. And that's what we truly start to believe. And we actually start creating experiences in our life to reinforce that belief, so that we can say, see, I told you I'm not worthy. I told you I don't belong. And we form thoughts around this and feelings about this. And we believe that it is the truth. That is the way in which we view the world, because it feels 100% real. And until we're told otherwise, until we learn otherwise, that is actually just a story that we are playing on loop over and over and over again, we think that's the truth and that's what's real. Now, in our learning and in sharing this, we're identifying that actually that is not the case. Even though it feels 100% real, that's just a story. And actually, we are complete already, and there isn't anything that we need to fix within ourselves in order to have what we want in life. That's just a story that we use to individuate, and nothing more. But the ego still holds on to this. So even though we've gained this knowledge that that's just a story, the ego is not going to let go of it. The ego is fixed. There is no changing it. And nor, by the way, do we really want to change it, because it's there. It's who we are. It's what makes us human. And we can choose to use it, or we can choose to shift our focus away from it. So because the ego is fixed, it functions exactly the same way every single time, regardless of the scenario we find ourselves in. And that actually works to our advantage when it comes to patterning because it's going after the same thing every time. And what it's going after is to complete what it deems to be incomplete about us. So to fulfill those beliefs that we hold about ourselves and about the world and about others. It's going to go after that every single time. So if I have a feeling that I don't belong, then my ego is always going to be striving to prove that I don't belong in any situation, regardless of what I'm going for. If you have a belief that you're not good enough, that's what your ego is seeking, regardless of what you think you're going for. And so as a result, you may think, okay, you know what? I found my dream home and I'm going to buy it, and I know the steps that logically I need to take, and I'm going to methodically follow each of them. I'm going after it. I'm getting that house. And so you think, I'm heading in this direction. I'm going down this path. I'm going after that house. Your ego could not care less that that's the house that you seek. Your ego is like, oh, we need to, before we go for whatever that is, we need to complete our incompleteness. We need to fulfill this belief. And so it's actually going this way. Even though you think you're going this way, your ego's directing you towards this way. And you may, in most cases, have no idea that this is going on. This is all going on unconsciously because that is the default setting in you. The ego is the default setting. It's what's running on autopilot unless we consciously shift the story. So unless we consciously acknowledge, oh, this is a story playing out for me. I acknowledge that's my default, but I also acknowledge that this is what I want, and so I'm going to deliberately shift my focus to this. That is the only way in which you're going to get what you want. Whatever has the greater power will win out. And unless you're aware of your default, likely your default is going to have the most power. So how does this relate to the patterning? With the patterning, there are steps that your ego follows every single time that it goes down that path to fulfill the unconscious beliefs. So I'm going to leave it there for today's video, and I'm going to continue this in tomorrow's video and take it steps further and start to dive into the actual patterning process. So for today, this is just an introduction of kind of the basics of the workings of the ego and how that lends itself to how we flesh out and actually, well, distill first and flesh out your pattern. So more on that tomorrow. See you then.